Hey everybody, in this video I'm going to start the clay bust project. In order to do that, I want to create a template of the silhouette or the profile of the person I'm going to do. I have just about everything that you need here, but really the only thing that's required is the profile of the person that you're going to work on, some paper that you can use to transfer that onto, and a piece of cardstock that you can use to transfer that profile to. So when you cut it out, it has a little bit more structure, and that template will hold up when you're actually holding it on the clay. In real life, an adult head is anywhere between 7 and 9 inches from chin to the top of the head. For this project, because you guys are working at home, I'm going to have you make a 5.5 inch head. You can see that this piece is actually 7 inches tall, which is potentially life size, but it is a little bit on the small side. It may seem easier to sculpt something that's a bit smaller, but smaller sculptures can be a little bit more difficult because you have to compress all those details. The nostrils, the eyes, the lips, everything gets a little bit smaller. Why 5.5 inches? Because a piece of copy paper is 8.5 inches from here to here by 11 inches this way. And so 8.5 would actually give us almost a life-size piece. If I take an 11-inch piece of paper and fold it in half, I'm going to get a 5.5 inch piece of paper. And so that's how I'm going to fit this head inside of here. Now I don't want to just make up a head like I've done here. I'm actually going to use a real likeness, try to figure out the profile, and then transfer it to a cardstock piece of paper and cut that out. Artists use all kinds of tools and tricks to render something, to look at something in reality and then recreate it as closely as they can. And really that's just building. If I look at this sideways, I have certain angles. I have measurements that I could take from here to here and here to here and figure out how to simplify this thing down. I like to think of something as hills and valleys or even a roof line. If you ask someone to build something for you, to build a house for you, if they take those blueprints and you say this is what it should look like in the picture or this is what it should look like, you're not going to be surprised if that builder gives you exactly what you asked for. So an artist does the same thing. They just need to figure out what angle is something, how far does it go until something else happens. So all I need to do is simplify this profile down into a series of hills and valleys that is unique to that individual person. And a silhouette holds a lot of information. You can usually tell the likeness of somebody just from their silhouette. So it can be very accurate. Again, it can be a very strong tool to use in your sculpture project. So I have this piece of copy paper here. I'm going to get that 5.5 inch square. In order to do that, I'm again going to fold this along that 11-inch side, the long side. I could use scissors. I'm going to fold this into a triangle. I'll try to be as precise as I can to get that right on the edge so that I actually get a square. And now this leftover piece, if I fold that over and get rid of it, I'm going to have a square. Now that I have this 5.5 by 5.5 inch square, I actually want to quarter it up. In order to do that, I'm going to fold it in half and fold it in half again. I want to do this as carefully as possible, and I didn't do that all that carefully because these are actually going to be sight lines. I'm making a grid. And then the other way. So now I have this grid that's 4 squares by 4 squares. And that square is important because we're going to transfer information from one grid to another grid. And in order for that to work, each one of these needs to be a square. So take a look at each shape and make sure that they all look like squares, that you don't have a rectangle over here and a rectangle over here. Okay, so here is an image of yours truly. Here's a color photo, but that's actually not important. It doesn't need to be color. Actually, I find it a little distracting to have color images. So I've printed up a black and white one. If you have the ability to lighten that photo so that you're not distracted by everything else that's going on, go ahead and do that. But anything that you print out should work. You do want a decent size. A tiny little photo is really hard to work from. So the first thing I want to do is find the actual profile here. This is kind of a game of telephone. I'm going to copy this several times. I'm going to trace over the top of this. I'm going to transfer it to this image. I might actually cut that out again and transfer it to the template, and then finally I'm going to use that to transfer it to clay. And so if from the very beginning you do a bad job of tracing this, that game of telephone where something gets repeated or copied over and over again, it's not going to be a great copy. So I'm going to make sure that I have a good Sharpie. I'm going to slow down, take my time, and try to get each detail as accurately as possible. Notice that the background of this photo is completely white. That's going to be really helpful in not confusing the background with your object, with your subject. Now I don't want to include the hair. I actually want to find the skull. It's much easier to sculpt when you have a sense of the skull and where the features of the skull are within the person that you're sculpting. So I'm going to draw a simple circle. I'm going to take the forehead here and I'm going to go somewhere to the back of the head and just kind of lightly trace in a circle. Now our head isn't necessarily a circle, and actually if you take the hair off, you'll see that all of our skulls are a little bit different, but there is a basic shape here. So I've got this round shape to the top. That's going to help me a little bit. There's also an egg shape to the head right there. So here's that axis, which we'll talk about much later on. There's another egg that kind of holds our brain. So I'm going to draw a smaller circle to the back and come up here. Now this requires looking at a skull a little bit and trying to find that in there. But if I can use that information now to come on back, I may be able to see the skull without the hair. Another reason for using the Sharpie on copy paper is that actually once I get that tracing on there, not only can I see it nice and cleanly, but when I flip it over, all the distractions of the facial features are gone, so that all I see is a silhouette. So I have a handout that you can download and take a look at. There's many ways to divide this up, but I've broken it up step by step so that you can be ensured of success. Now that I have this and I'm ready to go, I need a straight edge of some kind. If you have a ruler, great. I'm going to use something that has 90 degrees, but you could use even a piece of paper because that has 90 degrees as well. The first step is to put a line on the front of the nose. That's going to be one side of my box. The second step is going to be to put another line right on top of the head. I want to make sure that this top line is exactly 90 degrees to this side line. So I'm going to look at this edge here and make sure that it is not slightly off, but right on it. 1, 2, check again, and then you can draw it. Now the next one's going to be the chin. There's a lot of variation in the chin and where that jawbone is. I've got a little bit extra here on my jaw, so I could go down to there or to the chin line. It really doesn't matter. I'm going to go ahead and bring that right there. I want to double check that that is in line. Check it one side, check it on the other, and then go ahead and draw your line. Now the next obvious thing to do would be to put a line in the back of the head, but I actually don't want to do that. I want to measure. I want to make sure that the length of this shape is exactly the same as the height, because that's what's going to make it a square. So I'm going to cut off a little scrap of paper. I'm going to take that piece of paper, put it on the very tip of the square, come down to the bottom, and measure just how tall that is. So now I can take that height and bring it to check the width. Because what makes a rectangle a square is that it is exactly as wide as it is tall. Notice that I've put a hash mark on one side and on the other, on the bottom and the top. A lot of times when people aren't used to measuring, they just put one mark and then draw the line anywhere. But I actually need to start from point A, go to point B. I'm going to double check this line to see if it's a right angle. By aligning my tool here with the line on the bottom, I can see that it does line up here. And so I'll go ahead and draw that in. Okay, so now I have this trapped inside of a square. And notice there's just a little bit of gap inside of here. Sometimes a head may be on the outside, it may be really far in. That really doesn't matter. The important thing is that the head is trapped inside of a square. So now I'm going to go back to the scrap of paper. I'm going to double check that this is the piece that I want. And so that I don't get confused with this side, I'm going to rip it off and get rid of that piece. This is the beginning of my square, and this is the end of my square. I'm going to go ahead and fold that, not to the ripped edge, but right where I've made that mark. And now that is in half. I'm going to fold that into here, and now I have a quarter. So again, in half, and if I can carefully do it this way, in quarters. If I open that up, I want to put my mark right on those folds. And now I can transfer those quarters onto the square. So now I have this in a grid, 4 by 4. I can see a little bit of variation in this grid. Some of these look just a little bit smaller than others. Some may be a little more vertical, and some may be a little bit more horizontal. This is close enough for what I'm doing, but it is good to notice if your grid is quite a bit off. So when you take a look at your grid, if there's a lot of variation in these things, something's gone wrong. Go ahead and double check your grid. Okay, so now I'm going to transfer what's in one box to what's in another. I'm going to start with the easiest stuff. If you take a look, all the features are right up in this front row. More on that later. Let's start with this easy stuff back here. Something that you could do is label these. A, B, C, D, and 1, 2, 3, 4. Now I could just freehand this. This is pretty easy to take a look at where these things interact, to simplify this down to a very simple shape and put that in. Now that I have that, I'm going to put in a little bit of a curve there. Something else you can do, however, is divide these up even further. So I'm going to take this and divide it up in half. I'm going to take this same one and divide that up in half. I'm going to take that and divide that part in half. I'll take that and divide that in half. And now I'm closer to where that curve is. It looks like this curve intersects there, and it intersects right about there, and it goes a little bit out, about halfway in between those two. So C1, I'm going to look at the halfway point here and the halfway point here. I'm looking between these 2 points and what's halfway. Again, I'm going to cut that in half. I'll cut this in half. And then cut this in half, and now I'm just about where my line is. So halfway, halfway, and again, and that's about where my line should be. Now that almost looks like a straight shot. So now I'm going to focus on the front. I'm just going to take this piece, fold it over. I'm going to do my best to just eyeball these in half and make sure that each one looks like a square. Now over here, I have my piece of paper, which I can fold in half. Okay, so now I'm ready to go box by box. So as you can see, I can eliminate all of this information right here because the forehead is coming through this box here. Just a little bit to the top and just a little bit close to that one. And it's almost a straight line, but there's a little bit of a curve to it. I'm going to look at this little triangle inside of here. And it looks like it goes down to the halfway point between these two. So between these two, here's the halfway point, and there's a little bit of a curve inside there. I'm going to take from point A to point B, point A to point B, split that in half. I'll split that in half again. And now I know where to bring that line to. There's a little bit of a curve going the other way. Now this one, I'm just going to eyeball another square in there. I want to make sure where I'm at. Don't lose your position. Looks like that's exactly where the nose goes. So now I know where that point goes. I can go in, up, so from here to here, it looks like the tip of the nose is right here. And it comes up straight. You want to look at negative shapes and positive shapes. So I'm not just looking at the nose, that's the positive, here's the face. I'm also looking at the negative shape. What is this little triangle right here? So if I can find that triangle, that'll help me figure that out. Make sure you don't lose your place. I'm getting this one confused, so I want to make sure that I'll go ahead and put a little circle there, and a little triangle here. Something that just kind of keeps you on track. The nose and the lips are where people can really kind of get off track, because in your mind you're thinking about a nose and a lip, and you're thinking, especially if it's someone you know or if it's you yourself, you just kind of try to fix it on your own. But turning something sideways can really help. So I can look, just like back to that roof line, look at what angle is this? And is there a little bit of a curve, or is it pretty much straight? Don't assume you know where it should go. And I'm taking a little bit of extra time here. I'm going to go ahead and come down here. It looks like that's the halfway point. And that lip should come over here. I'm just going to look at the angle of this and try to find that there. What's the angle of here? Okay, so now that I have that, I'm going to go ahead and clean it up a little bit. It's a really good idea to take a break from this and look at it with fresh eyes, or to show it to someone else. Or if you can, look at it backwards. And since I'm using a Sharpie, it does come through. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this out. Again, the game of telephone, cutting this out, this is a process of drawing too. So if I kind of hack this up, and I'm not very accurate with it, I'm going to undo all the time spent drawing. Okay, so now that I have this cut out, I'm going to go ahead and trace this onto a piece of cardstock so that I can use that as the tool for my clay sculpture. Also, it's going to allow me to add a little bit of the shoulders and neck since I chopped that off. And I can kind of check the simple angles. Here's the angle of the neck. Line these up the same. Check the angle of the neck and bring that on over. You know, you don't need to be really perfect, but make sure it's not way off or way off. So this is definitely close enough. Okay, I'm ready to cut this out. Now I want this extra material on this side, and this side, because I want to use this part as positive space and this part as negative space. So this is the negative space, the background. This is the positive space. And both of those are going to be useful later on. Okay, so now I have my template and I've got my positive silhouette.